Heavenly Father, again, I want to thank you for this day, this beautiful day that you've given us, another day of life. Father, thank you for the people that we are here to serve. Father, I pray that you continue to bless our Cherokee Nation, our leaders, be with our chairperson today. Help us to get involved here. This is an important meeting. Father, I pray for the leaders of our country. I pray for our troops. Father, keep them safe and bring them home soon. And Father, go with us now and help us to do what's right for those that we serve and forgive us where we fail. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Roll call.
Commissioner O'Leary. Bill John Baker.
Here.
Bill Anglin. Jack Baker. Roger Connor. Jeff Crittenden.
Here.
Mary Staley. John Garden. Scott Hoskins.
Here.
Bill Johnston. Taylor King. John Keener. Jack Bob Martin. Lavon Stockhouse. David Thornton.
Here.
Sheriff County Watt. Bill Sherman.
At this time, committee's approval, I want to turn everything over to Doug to start us through his analysis of the budget, and feel free to get my attention and ask questions. But we'd like to do a plain overview of the budget.
Are the other council members here in the building that are not
Okay.
very important?
What you make today?
Doug, if you would.
Are these on? Okay.
What did you say?
Okay. You got it to do. That's your vote. We'll try to do that after the meeting. The wish of the chair is to go through the overview
Yes.
and then entertain questions or discussion before moving in further. Okay. All right. I believe everyone has my report. As the rest of the counselors come in, I'll give them their book. I've reviewed the 2007 budget request submitted by Executive Branch. The review included the line item budgets, which are your blue books, as well as the reports from the financial system. I've prepared summary reports to compare with the prior year budget level to the 2006 budget level, as well as comparing to what I consider a much more relevant baseline, and that's the 2005 audited actual spending. Included comparison reports by funding source as well as by group or division, as we used to call it, and program. Also included is a comparison of the proposed staffing level changes by division as compared to the 2006 budget level. The proposal has only $899,000 of undesignated surplus from the general fund. The current year, which ends September 30th of this month, has over $12 million of unappropriated revenue that is not included in this budget. I believe the majority of these funds are actual fiscal year 2005 carryover dollars that should be acknowledged and made available in the appropriations bill. Also want to point out, in an attachment to the correspondence, attachment A, the tribe's budgeting an increase in salaries and wages over the actual salaries paid out in fiscal year '05, our last completed year, by over $16 million or 28%. Another significant increase appears in contract services, which has increased over the '05 actual spending level by nearly $11 million or 13%. The indirect cost pool budgets are coming in slightly under the amount programs are budgeting to provide in IDC funding. It's a good thing. This should serve as an indicator that future rates may experience a slight decrease. The nation should continue to monitor the support spending, or what's called IDC, to enable the programs to deliver the maximum amount of their funding to direct services. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to perform this review for the Tribal Council, as well as the cooperation by the Treasurer's Office. Gina may have one in her
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
office.
I apologize because I know I walked in late, but did we discuss the impact of the minimum wage on budgets?
No, I've just introduced my review. There's been no other discussion other than what my review consisted of.
Okay, do we have that analysis? Because I would think we'd have to consider budgetary implications to give folks the ability to expend the money.
I'm not given any analysis to this budget review. That's a separate piece of legislation, my understanding, and that analysis, if it's going to be considered on the merits, is not included in this budget.
Well, does that legislation not affect this budget?
It depends on how that legislation is funded.
So it's going to full council on Monday, and we never allocated how it was going to be funded. I don't remember. I thought it came out of general fund.
Well, this budget is identifying certain amounts of revenues that are available for expenditure. And as with any budget, once you begin the fiscal year, all those are subject to line item reallocations.
So if we cause a budget to exceed its spending authority, how are we enabling the administration to expend or exceed budgetary authority? Because they can't. So I want to make sure that we can meet our obligations, and I have yet to hear or see analysis how we can do that.
Okay. Again, my understanding is that is a question mundane to a piece of legislation going Monday night, not the Comprehensive Budget Act of 2007. The Budget Act of 07 is going to have mitigating factors that could alter these estimated expenditure line items for a whole variety of issues that can come up. But that particular wage issue can affect how the line item distribution of the programs are handling for those employees that would be affected by that act if it were passed. Does that?
I just don't
That's all
find that
I'm saying.
acceptable. I'm trying to understand, this has been in the works. I'm trying to figure out, supposedly, we were given indication that there was analysis that had been done by you and some other council folks. I haven't yet seen that. So I want to make sure we're making an informed decision, because we're talking about salaries right now. We're talking about merit raises, those things in a budget, and I would think this is a consideration that we have to hear agree with.
At point well taken.
We're kind of getting off track here just a little bit, and but if you'll listen to the analysis, you're going to find that there's $12 million in the budget that has not been appropriated at all this year. We're going to find that there's over $12 million that was appropriated by us, that wasn't spent in the budget this year. And we're going to find that they're asking for the same $12 million that they didn't spend last year in this new budget. So we're talking $36 million here.
But part of the budget hearings process is how we philosophically look at fiscal responsibility in our budget. And in the past, I've heard our accountants, because we advise us, tell us that we out of additional, or the carryover, thank you, those monies on increasing the salary. So I don't know why the facts have conveniently changed with the philosophy, but I need to understand better during this budget process what's happening with that, and I haven't seen any analysis. I'm very supportive of the minimum wage, but I don't want to be making any willy-nilly decisions without looking at the full budget picture, which includes the minimum wage increase that we have in front of us.
And if I might address that, one part of that comment. Whenever there is millions of dollars that are budgeted for salaries in positions that go unfilled from year to year, you can't relay a budget impact from a minimum wage law to a position that is never going to get filled, or historically never has been filled. When I say it's not a good idea, in my opinion, for this body to appropriate carryover dollars for recurring program salaries, what I'm saying is don't commit to a long-term employment to an individual that you have no recurring revenue stream to fund their salary.
How is that not the same, Doug?
How's it not the same?
Okay, so you're telling me, what I heard when we considered this was, we're going to affect all these people and they're going to be very happy. That's what I heard originally. Now you're telling me that those positions will never be filled, so who are we really helping?
I'm not understanding the question.
Okay. What he's
Because
saying,
otherwise, we are long-term impacting people's salaries, and we're going to be obligated going forward to bring that money in to pay their salaries.
I don't believe there's any program that's using carryover gen fund dollars in this budget that would be affected by a minimum wage law that would drive them into a negative budget position. If any of those exist, then I think this body needs to address those on an individual basis and see if subsidy funding needs to occur.
So how are we, because we're considering it Monday night, how are we going to fund that minimum wage increase?
The minimum wage.
Are we going to take their money from the kids? We've already taken enough from the kids. Are we going to take, what are we going to do?
Well-
How are we funding that?
look, an example. The Head Start, 3 weeks ago, took their minimum wage to $8 out of their budget, which sickened me because I was really hoping that we could find those dollars to pay the teachers that $8 minimum. But no, they didn't fund some administrative costs, some administrative personnel didn't replace some folks so that they could pay out of their budget the $8 an hour. They didn't know that one was coming forward to get those people up to that living wage. What Doug is telling you, and when you see this, you're going to find that there's very few departments that have not been budgeting for years positions that they have never filled. So consequently, we're budgeting for jobs, for salaries. It's never being filled. It wasn't filled last year. It wasn't filled the year before, but they're asking for it again this year. So that easily those dollars for a $60,000 a year position could fund all the minimum wage, and it wouldn't affect this budget one iota. They've got the money. There's not a single program that we have found that is not carrying over enough money to take care of the minimum wage in salary line.
Matt?
Yes, please.
So, let me understand this. So some of these jobs we found difficult to fill, like in the health field, for example, like maybe doctors or those folks, we're just going to eliminate those positions even though we've always needed to fill them and we continue to pursue candidates that just haven't worked out so that we can fund these other jobs?
No, I don't think that's what's being said at all. I'm saying that
Because those are the
traditionally,
only
these
jobs that I
departments,
remember.
well,
That haven't
it's
been
all
filled.
over the nation. And you're going to find that almost every department is having, I mean, we've got one page of 74 line items where they spent less than 50% of their budget this year, and we've got a month left. And I'm talking $12 million worth of it that we budgeted, that we said, yes, go out and serve our people pay your salaries, hire these people, do this, do that, and there's $12 million of it that you're gonna see in just a minute.
I'm excited about finding a way where we can increase monies to our folks and have them have a better quality of life, especially through their job and the amount of money they make. But I don't think we should be arbitrarily making decisions without details in front of all of us. If you have this information, I need to see it. Because I've thought more and more about it, and I'm really concerned about how we're making budget decisions without adequate information. And I'm talking details, because I don't work on budgets without details.
Look at page 4.
I think we would just listen to those recipients, and maybe we can see where those things are and understand it better. I think we're trying to get more than what we're here today for.
If you would continue and enlighten us on what's before us.
There's some key points of interest that I think have already been addressed to a certain degree, but I'll go ahead and go over them again if I can get my clicker to work. Page 2. The Tribal Discretionary Fund, or the General Fund, contains 13 new initiatives. These are the same initiatives that Ms. Ketcher addressed last week in her overview. They range from recurring programs to reserve for IDC shortfalls. The request will utilize all discretionary funds of over $4.4 million, leaving about $900,000, as I already mentioned. Administration requested in last year's comprehensive budget $12 million of discretionary budgets, mostly recurring. And there's another slide that I'll get to on that point that will address that a little bit in detail. The dividend estimate of $23 million that's in this budget is based on 30% of projected net income for C&E in 2007, or $76.6 million. The estimate appears light to me since C&E is on track to net around $86 million this year. Sorry. Another point, several programs are consistently budgeting minor increases over the previous budget level, but are equally consistent in spending much less than their budget. Obviously, when tribal discretionary funds are consistently appropriated or budgeted yet remain unspent at the end of the year, these tribal dollars never get utilized. They're kind of like in a reserve status and just flows from year to year. Although the budget indicates a total use of funds of $348 million, this budget contains over $33 million in federal road funding. That represents our entitlement, by the way. That's all of our road entitlements for many years' worth of road construction projects. At least $25 million will stretch far beyond 2007 fiscal year. The interfund transfers of $33 million are also contained in this $348 million budget. Taking these items into consideration reflects an actual tribal government expenditure budget of approximately $290 million.
I know, can you go back to that? In our approximately actual government budget, $290 million, is what you're saying.
Expenditure budget, yes. Well, the transfers,
It's not $348 million. It's something like the road program that runs carried over.
sure. The road program has something like 33 million in it. Okay, I don't know if we've ever spent more than, Cherokee Nation spending on roads, IR road projects of more than $5 million in a single year.
Callie, if you want to say something.
Yeah, I just,
Come up to mine.
I just wanted to point out that I agree with Doug's statement there, and that is consistent with how we have prepared budgets since I've been around Cherokee Nation. We have always budgeted all of the funds that are available for roads, even though we may not actually spend them all in one fiscal year. They are appropriated by project So the program needs to have spending authority based on all of the projects, so they need to have some flexibility. So this is not inconsistent with how we have always done budgets here at Cherokee Nation.
All I'm,
Go ahead.
over on the roads, it's very interesting to me. Do we receive funding every year through that road program, additional funding?
I think there are some, I don't know what you call them, but priority funding when a road gets approved.
Yes.
I don't know the technical term for that, but
Each year, the roads program submits a list to the BIA requesting funding for new roads, so that project list is always hopefully being added to, and they work on as many of the projects as they can physically get to, but obviously if there are funds available at the BIA to help us build more roads, we want to apply for them. So that number can get added to each year depending on what's available through BIA.
Well, what I was primarily trying to get at is what I've seen in the past 3 or 4 years, that most of that road funding is going into 3 different districts. And it looks like to me that you've got $33 million there right now that's extended over into other districts if you're going to get refunded.
Well, it is appropriated through the BIA by project. We don't have the flexibility to just arbitrarily, but
But there's other roads in other districts that's our roads.
and then the roads department would need to make that request through the BIA to, in effect, you would take money from one road and
I
reprogram
can't
it.
remember when this carryover was 15 million, and that's 33. So it looks like that there's about 3 different districts here, they're receiving that funding, and some of these other districts should be receiving funding also, roads being built in their district.
I know that is something that comes through, Community Services Committee, and is discussed at length in that committee before the proposal goes to the BIA.
there's a prioritization effort on those roads.
Yeah, I realize that.
And
And
we can request a repriority.
And the truth is, there's just now been roads in Cherokee County that we pushed for 8 years ago. And there's just now, because when I first came on,
Well, we got $33 million.
yeah, when I first
They
came
did not
on,
speak.
they were only doing 8-year county.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was 8-year county, 8, 9 years ago. But,
The one thing obviously that's going to reduce that is if we've expanded our capacity for the road funding to come into the tribe, then if we increase our capacity to construct the roads and expend these funds in a faster schedule, then that's going to reduce this carryover entitlement that's, and as Callie said, this is consistent with the way it's been budgeted every year, and I consistently point it out. Because I think it's something that we need to come back to, understanding and realization that there's at least $20 million here that I don't believe anyone expects to get expended.
yeah,
Doug, what percentage of the federal dollars in this budget we're talking about, with the 348 or the 290? Percentage of federal dollars.
Ran that calculation yesterday. I think I derived approximately 235 million, I believe, is what I ended up with the federal. So I'll have to get a specific number for you, but I ran a rough calculation. It was around 245, which I think is around 80.
continue that.
But
Oh, David?
But the 290 says it's actually tribal government expenditure budget appropriation. How much of that 290 was actually spent?
Well, none of it has been spent yet. I mean,
Yeah.
and I want to clarify something that the budget, if the roads are left in there, okay, which like they have been in the past, if you leave the entire road entitlement in the budget, then you would obviously add 25 to the 290. I'm trying to give you an understanding of what is expected to be expended. The transfers is moving money from, in essence, front pocket to your back pocket. But it takes budget authority, the way we've defined transfers, as a use of funds. Okay? We can move money from front to back pocket and end up with a $500 million budget if we just do enough transfers. See my point? The transfers are not going to be expended. They just have to have authority to be moved from the front to the back. I just wanted you to get an understanding of what's expected to be expended in the form of cash outlay. Checks.
Doug, I'm just a little confused here on number 4, just trying to understand based on how much money we have here, based on the matching principle and generally accepted accounting principle. Is this allowable if we're budgeting for dollars that will not be expended in that year?
I don't know of any prohibition in GAAP, or it'll be a governmental accounting standard, that would preclude us from budgeting our entire entitlement balance for every grant or compact that we have. In other words, I don't know of anything that would prohibit us from budgeting a 3-year grant all in 1 year. I believe we do that on a few programs. I understand. That's why, that's the point of point 4, was to try to get back to a number that should be reasonably expected to be expended based on this comprehensive budget request.
Well, continue.
Those interfund transfers, this next slide, the interfund transfer effect have been taken out of this slide. And you can see that anywhere from 76 to 84%, anywhere from 15 to 25% of the total budget authority is not spent. The spike you see compared from 05 actual spending, which is $230 million. Now that was a $280 million comprehensive budget, and $230 was expended. And I can assure you, there were several budgeted positions that were not filled that make up that $50 million. And I'll show you the slide that proves the theory in just a moment. Now the $331 million increase of 06 budget over 05, that represents this is where I'm talking about. If you compare 331 million to 230 actual expenditures of 05, you won't see but $4 million of road funding in 05 actuals. But there was $25 million of road budget in 06. Okay, the 05 budget for the roads was, I believe, 23 million. Yet 5 got expended. Okay, so that's where I'm talking about the effect of this, what appears to be a budget surplus, but keyword budget surplus, in these blocks that are on top of the actuals or unused budget. Some of those are not planned to be expended. When we get $5 million to build road XYZ out here, and we get it funded this year, typical roads take multi-years to go through the engineering, design, easements, utility movements, all that takes multiple years to get that road completed and finished. So we know good well we're not going to spend $4 million the next year, and that's the point there. Other increases in 06 budget compared to the 05 slide is the $26 million worth of capital projects fund that's in 06. We recently gone through in our modification process the creation of a capital project fund to capture the cost of the construction of the health clinics, and that's driving 26 of that. IHS and HUD also each increased $10 million over the 05 level. 2007 compared to the 06, you can see is $15 million decrease. That represents the shift of the construction costs of the capital projects to C&I. That capital projects fund is where we're seeing the $15 million decrease. Any questions on this slide? Next slide are the revenues. And I do want to point out that transfers in, just like transfers out, are use of funds and included in the budget authority. Transfers in, I have taken out of this slide. I've also taken out C&E dividends, because I've got another slide for the dividends. But this will exclude the arbitrary movement of money and the effect of the movement of money between funds, and it also takes out the effect of the dividends, which basically leaves all of the tribal revenue streams that are non-dividend related to C&E gaming. That includes the federal funding, which is the majority of it. You'll see a $37 million decrease. 15 million of that is the capital projects fund related to the construction projects. $8.5 million is related to some general fund carryover that's not included, and $8 million is related to HUD funding decrease. 2006 budget had more of a catch-up funding for multi-year Indian housing plans being expended in that budget, and you know, when we have ramped up in the years in the past to, instead of continually carrying over multi-year IHPs into different appropriation cycles, we ramped up to try to get years of expenditures to represent a year of IHP funding. We're getting to a point now where that's going to level off, and that's happening in 07's budget. Now, that will flip whenever that will balance itself whenever the 07 IHP funding comes into play. Then obviously that revenue, the red bar there on the chart, will spike on up with whatever is put on the table for the 07 Indian housing plan. Several of these new initiatives, the meth reduction initiative that's being utilized by the Marshal Service for $210,000, behavioral health $235,000, ICW $816,000, and a preventive ICW program, I believe is what that's called, $176,000. Those were all addressed in the overview by Callie. JOM has a special project request in here for $622,000. Electronic health record project, $645,000. Now that particular project, I believe, is kind of considered a phase 2 to the consolidation project that the council appropriated, I think it's about 10 months ago, to try to consolidate all the patient record information into a database. This is like phase 2 to actually, I believe, get that information out to all the clinics and get everything on real time. Treasurer's office, $200,000. That's Constitution requirement. Indirect cost shortfall, $710,000. It's being requested and as an increase. Cherokee Nation Communities for at-large, $82,000. A recruitment initiative by Human Resources, $420,000. The majority of that has been requested for relocating expenses, travel, and what appears to be finders, like recruiting services. Youth financial literacy in the Commerce Service Department's requesting $120,000. West Coast Celebration, $50,000. And language and culture, child care, $187,000. I want to point out that in the past, up until last year, the blue books used to be 2 books. There used to be 2 blue books. And the reason for that is because each budget back then contained a narrative that explained the purpose of that appropriation cost center, or that purpose. those narratives are not included any longer. There's only a narrative for the group, the division total. And when initiatives like these come into the Cherokee Nation process, and that particular group leader doesn't address these requests in their division's narrative, then I really have no way of knowing what it's for or what it contains without deciphering it through the line item budget, the actual line items that are being expended on those budgets. So I can't really tell you much more about these other than what they're titled. Their totals, $4.4 million, is again, these have already been addressed by the administration. This next slide are fiscal year 06, this current year discretionary budgets that as of day before yesterday are less than 50% expended. Now, this is not all of the discretionary budgets for the Cherokee Nation in this year. These are only the ones that, as of day before yesterday, are still below 50% expended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've got something in our book, but it looks like
The slide's right in front of it.
this is
Yep.
the same, on
It's
this
the-
actual
yes.
budget for now, this is the same on front and back. So it's
Yes,
not two
sorted
big
different.
lists.
No, just sorted differently.
There's one page of these programs.
One page of those that are under 50%.
So just the second page, you can just X out like.
No, it's a different sort. That one's sorted by group if you want to see what division is.
I looked through these, and there was a significant amount of them that were our projects that never got expended, and we just threw money at things. So I'm kind of concerned about.
I think we need to go through that in detail.
Yeah, I mean, we do, because there's some of them that, like, I don't want to take money away from land acquisitions, even if we haven't spent it. I hope we're buying up as much land as we can.
That's why they've requested their carryover.
Okay.
There's obviously a timing issue related to how quick a budget can be expended. This slide, what I've attempted to do here is to show you that there's $14 million that is unexpended. Now, there's $18 million appropriated, but $14 million for this group of budgets is unexpended. However, some of that has been appropriated here of recent. $9.3 million of it was appropriated effective the first day of the fiscal year back in October of '05. And you can see here through each mod package and the legislative act when the effective date of those budgets were availed or were made effective.
You know, I just got your black book. I mean, we didn't have it before this. So have we given the administration or any of these programs the opportunity to tell us that maybe there's commitments already made, or they know they're going to spend it, or are we just thinking this is free money that we can have on for it?
I'm just reporting what the financial system says. I've not discussed with the administration. I haven't tried to figure out which ones of these. There's about 150 programs in the general fund
We can't
alone.
assume that this money is actually available, and we can't assume that it doesn't have a near-term commitment.
If it has commitments, that should be represented in the financial system, if they're following the purchase order policy.
Thank you.
If something was not, that I asked, something is not supposed to, next budget, how does that affect what you're doing?
I have no way of knowing. I want to remind everyone that we have 17 divisions, I think, about 60 departments, and several hundred budgets, okay? There's probably 30,000 budget line items. If someone has coded something to an incorrect line item, I have no way of knowing. But that's why we have an accounting department.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a good analysis that supplements some of the work my group has been doing. I would like to discuss some of these top items just real quickly. When you look at the
We're not on
list-
that sheet yet.
Oh, sorry. Okay, when we get to that.
Be right after this. The 14 million, there's the makeup of when that 14 million was appropriated. Again, there's the 12 million that is unappropriated surplus that's in Mod 12. Now, some of the 14 million will be obligated and expended by 9/30. Unless everyone's waiting for the last few weeks of the year to expend their budget, I wouldn't think that a big majority of that 14 million is going to be actually expended. It equals 26 million remaining discretionary. Some of that will be expended. None of the 12 will, because it doesn't have any appropriation authority to it. Now, that going into a detail.
This would include the 1.25 or 1.2, 1,250,000, which was froze due to a lawsuit or a petition, right? Because we've got 500,000 to get off the boat and 750,000 for the media campaign, and that was all froze. So that's like churned up right there.
Actually, they didn't give a restraining order on that. The tribunal chose not to give the restraining order. So I don't know that that's a correct statement that it's froze.
Okay, but to address the concerns of our citizens, the administration chose to wait so that they weren't caught in expending funds that the court might freeze. And so therefore that money's been held up, which should have been expended this year, and so it was under extenuous circumstances.
I do want to clarify something. The 750,000 from the Cherokee Nation government perspective and appropriation has been expended.
So is that included?
That's not in there. The check is not in.
Okay, so it's on the list, but it's not included in the 14 million.
It is not included.
But it had.
I treat it as being expended when we charge it to an account and we cut a check and it leaves the Cherokee Nation. According to GAAP, it's expended. Whether the holder of the check that receives it and sits on it is irrelevant to our booking.
Thank you.
Now, ma'am.
I'd like to recognize Callie.
If you would let Doug go through it, and then you step in next, if that's all right.
I was just thinking, what I was wanting to do was point out some of the larger variances here.
And I'll address some of those larger ones, and she won't have to.
Okay.
You'll feel the need, because I will explain some of these larger variances. I'm going to have to come up here to do it. A little quicker doesn't work with the spreadsheet. The land acquisition has a $4.1 million budget. $1.7 million is expanded. Now, this is in page 4 of everyone's book. And I wanted to go over a little bit what this page represents. The group, GRP, is the group or the division number that coincides with the numbers of tabs in your book. Okay? The budget is our current 2006 appropriation authority. Obviously, actual is just that. And the balance is the unexpended balance on 2006. This particular land acquisition is 41% expended. Now, I'm going to move over to the right just a little bit because there's more information on your page. This column is accumulated total, which just does that. It accumulates the total through all these activities and through time. And then let's go into the 07 request. There's another $4,050,000 of 2007 settlement funds that are appropriately brought into the budget. They requested $1,867,000 of carryover, which is a pretty good estimate because remember they had to. This is a really good example because they had to estimate in June what they were not going to spend by the end of September. Okay, when we come back over here, right now there's 2.4. They estimated 1.9. That's not a bad estimate there. Okay, and again, it was approved in the Comprehensive Budget Act of 2006 back in October. Now, the contingency reserve is one that you would not want to see any actuals on. Because obviously, this is a contingent budget for things that we don't have any appropriation for, that are contingent items that we need to go and we reserve kind of like a rainy day fund. None expended. They requested another $1,010,000 to be on top of that. And there's the $2 million in carryover. I think the $10,000 difference you're seeing on this one is the insurance for the John Ketcher Youth Shelter ceiling that came in from the water hydrants coming on, and they had to do an insurance claim. You guys decided to go ahead and pay their deductible, their insurance deductible. Okay, now let's go back to the left. Cash match for grants. 18% expended on a $1.8 million budget. Now we can probably talk about that here in a minute. We've got a $507,000 new funding and $609 carryover. So this budget's considerably going down, which makes sense to me. I would like to see us having more than $1.1 million cash match requirement. As long as our federal funding is not going down, then we should be able to see we're either getting a lower cash requirement from the funding agent, or we're getting some grants that aren't requiring cash matches like some of the other issues do. Detox Center feasibility study, $500,000 budget, $30,000 actual, $470,000 balance, and there's no budget. Okay? So
That was our initiative, and we just threw out a figure not knowing how much it was, right? So after the meeting.
that was back in August of last year. I remember this was put on the table as a feasibility study.
That was a motion made by this body without input from him. And so that's kind of our responsibility to say, override it.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because I think that once a feasibility study is conducted, and obviously they did one for $30,000, because that was expended several months ago. I'm not so sure the feasibility study was ever presented to the health committee.
Well, and the way it actually was, the council put an initiative in for a detox center. There is not one in northeastern Oklahoma. There is not one in the 14th county. And we believe, or at least I believe we believe, that we had enough methamphetamine problems that we needed a detox center. Administration came back and says, can we take part of this money and do a feasibility study first? We agreed. They did the feasibility study and then chose to do nothing else. And we can appropriate till we're blue in the face. We cannot make administration spend the dollars unless we write additional loans.
I want if they presented the feasibility study, I'm just not aware of it. So I'll retract my prior statement. I say I don't think they have. I don't know if they have. I wasn't aware that they ever did.
They did, and they discussed and brought it up several times and asking questions about it, but they are still researching what the best solution is. And there's also debate around whether a detox center is enough, because it's really a bigger problem that needs a bigger solution than just a detox center keeping somebody back out on the street. So I don't think it's fair that we throw money at something and not have them give an opportunity to resolve it for the people. I don't think that's the future being painted. Because I appreciate the work that our health department does.
Self-help emergency assistance had a $400,000 budget. $158,000 was expended, and there's another $400,000 request in the budget. Now, the holiday obviously it's 47% expended, but I'm sure it's going to get a lot of expenditures when we go
Is that
along.
self-help emergency assistance, was that not our program? Was a council initiative?
No.
No, not that one.
Which one is it?
I think this is,
That's a community service program.
I think this
where
is,
they buy
Is this the
material.
housing?
I think it's a material only program.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
no,
do you want me to go through this list?
please.
Okay. I don't know if you want to go line by line all the way through it, but the holiday, obviously, we're going to see several expenditures coming into play here. $425,000 budget, slight increase in '07, not much. It's a little too early to tell on that one just how much is going to hit, but I imagine Lou has a history of being a good budgeting manager, and he typically tries to utilize all his budget from my memory. Marshal Service is a funding shift. There was a shift of funding and that occurred in 2006. I want to point out, these bold items over here that have the little asterisk by them were new initiatives in the '06 budget process. I just wanted to identify those for you.
We won't have the funds for increased fuel costs.
This is a shift of funding into Gen Fund. I believe it came off of motor fuels. And I don't have the ability to track their line item reallocation from year to year. They've got, I try to not get too far into their line item budgets, their actual line items, because they have the flexibility through the reallocation process to, if they're going to underutilize their salaries and they're going to need to pay for more fuel, then they are free to move their budget between salaries and fuel. So if I start trying to monitor 30,000 line item budgets, it's not feasible.
Well,
So I don't really address
actively
that.
trying to monitor this stuff and by throwing out that this is excess money, which is why I'm concerned and asking so many questions. So if we're going to take money away from services for the Cherokee people, I want to know why we're going to take money away from them if we think we're going to appropriate this, if it's going to be carried over.
I'll make something clear. I'm not recommending to the body that anyone take money from any budget. I've never made that recommendation. I'm not going to plan on it. That's not my prerogative. This body, I'm trying to present the information in a factual manner where you can make informed decisions, but I'm not about to sit up here and give anyone the illusion that I know where the needs of the people, or I know how to administer a budget more effectively. So,
Well, earlier you indicated that's where we were going to get the money for the increase in the wage, so, in the chair. So
no, I didn't
I'm
say.
trying to put
I didn't
together a
say for you to
picture
cut-
here.
I didn't say for you to cut budgets to fund it. I'm saying there's $26 million that's going to be unexpended at the end of September
Did you say
unless someone starts spending the most they can spend of that.
I have a point of order.
12.
We're trying to get through these budgets. We're not trying to be argumentative. And if everybody would wait to be recognized before they speak out, it would be appreciated.
Marshal Service spent $79,000, 26% of their budget. There is no recurring. Now that, you need to understand that they're not requesting any general fund monies for 2007. Okay? What has happened in the past is what we see is when the Marshal Service presents a budget to the next Indian Housing Plan, you're going to see that the Marshal Service appears to be slightly down on their budget, which we need to understand that a significant amount of their funding is going to be coming through the 07 ISP. Okay. Sequoia High School summer student activities, 30% out of $317,000 or $94,000 expended. They're asking for another $376,000 in 07. Those are new monies. That column right there, the new dollar column, are 07 anticipated revenues. They're not carryover. That's the reason I wanted to break out the carryover funding, like the land acquisition, the contingency reserve, and the cash match. Those programs have gone into the process saying, we know we're not going to spend our budget, and we want to put that anticipated unexpended value. We want to ask the council, would you earmark it again? In some cases, the contingency reserve I'm sorry, the cash match for grants, that particular budget actually decreased its 07 funding request because largely of the 06 carryover. The Commerce Executive Director Gen Fund budget, $247,000, $40,000 was expended, or 17%, and requesting another $246,000 of new money. 7th and 8th grade project, $200,000 budget, 46 was expended. This particular budget, I believe, is something that I can understand. I think there's factors here that, because of when 7th and 8th grade come online with Sequoia, that we should expect to see that expenditure pattern next year to be significantly higher. And they're requesting $350 of new monies for next year. Registar software, that's the software package for the tribal, that is underway. That $150,000 budget, $15,000 has been expended, $136,000 unexpended, and when the budget was prepared, there wasn't anything turned in for a carryover. Tribal Trust Land Lease Application, $150,000 budget, $35,000 was expended, $125,000 of new money has been requested. Substance abuse treatment in the health department, $109,000 request, $5,800 has been expended. Now, keep in mind that we're still in the groove. $69,006 of new monies is being requested. We're still in the Budget Act group of comprehensive. So we're still in the group that was authorized for expenditure on 10/1/05. Housing accessibility program, $150,000. $53,000 is expended, roughly a third of it. Another $150,000 is being requested. Early childhood infrastructure repairs, $139,000. $43,000 has been expended. No request for carryover. Cherokee language incentive, $90,000 budget. None has been expended. None is requesting carryover. Strategic Council initiative, $79,000. That's a balance of what started to be a whole lot larger number than that. I think it was in excess of $1 million that budget authority whittled away as projects were identified. 79.5 balance, not being repeated. $100,000. Now this is the crane for the construction heavy equipment. You may recall there was dialogue and discussion back in the budget hearings of last year about the need for the crane, and apparently they bought it for considerably less than $100,000 for 22, and no request for continuation. Cherokee Helping Initiate Progress initiative, that again was one of the new initiatives that was proposed last year. $140,000 budget, $64,000 was expended, or 46%, or has been expended to date, excuse me. And $147,000 requested again for next year out of new money. Enterprise development, $75,000 of gen funding was requested, none expended to date. Another $75,000 requested for next year. Cherokee Nation Supreme Court building, $71,000 budget, $3,000 was expended, 4%. Another $71,000 of new money is requested for next year. Burial assistance, $77,000 budget, $13,000 expended, or 17%. Another $77,000 request for 07 funding. Cherokee Cultural Competitions, again, this is another new initiative to 06 proposal. $52,900, no expenditures to date, no request for carryover or continuance. Cultural enrichment in schools, $50,900 budget, no expenditures to date, and again, no request for continuance.
Sequoia Centennial, $50,000 budget, $3,000 expended, or 7%, requesting a continuance of 07 funding for the same level, $50,000. Oklahoma Water Resource Board agreement, another initiative, $47,000, $2,000 has been expended for 5%, and not requesting a continuance. Tahlequah Historic District, $50,000 budget, as a new initiative to last year, requested, $5,000 expended, no request for continuance. Sequoia Student Center, $42,000 budget, no expenditure, requesting another $42,000 for next year. We All Speak Cherokee, $40,000 budget, no expenditures, no request for continuance. Distance Education, $57,000 budget, $20,000 extended, 36%, request to continue with 07 funding at the same level. South Creek Park, $50,000 budget, $19,500 extended. Request for $20,000 additional funding in next year. Legislative initiatives out of the Law and Justice Department, $28,800 budget, $3,500 expended, or 12%, requesting a continuance with 07 funding at the same level. Cultural tourism, $25,000 budget with no expenditures, requesting an increase to $125,000 next year with new money. The Powwow Grounds, $25,000 budget, $2,600 expended, 10%, with another $25,000 request for next year's funding. Emergency Education Assistance, $37,500, with $15,700 expended, and another $37,500 requested out of 07 funding. The Housing Group, $24,000 budget, $5,000 expended, 22%, requesting another $24,000 continuance with 07 funding. Cherokee Summer Institute, this is another initiative from the comprehensive budget proposal of last year, $35,000 funding, $17,000 expended, almost half. This one almost was not on the report, with no funding for continuance. The Port Authority, $11,800 budget, no expenditures, requesting to continue at 07 funding at the same level. Marshal Service Narcotics Forfeiture, $10,000 budget, no expenditures, requesting to increase it to 20 out of 07 funding. University Outreach Program, $6,000 budget, $771 expended, and a $6,000 budget request out of 07. Trail of Tears activities, $8,000 budget, $3,100 expended, 40%, with a request to continue at the same level of 07 funding. There's a minor property tax on the phone. Okay, now, this next group that we just ended, all the above items that I just went through were in the Comprehensive Budget Act of 2006. Now we're in Mod 1, and these groups are going to be relatively small going forward. Katrina relief effort, $142,500 budget. Now, this particular one, if I'm not mistaken, was not using gen fund revenue, it was using fundraising revenue. Now, either we didn't achieve the fundraising effort, or the expenditures are booked somewhere else. But the budget, I'm just telling you, the budget is $142,500 with no expenditures. Obviously, no request for continuance. And I can't, maybe Cal can explain that one, but I don't know where the expenditures are, and maybe the revenue just didn't come in. Strengthening our nation, $75,000 budget, $12,000 expenditures, and requesting another $110,000 with 07 revenues. Increase of $35,000. The orphan cemeteries, $25,000 budget, no expenditures. Requesting $2,300, that's by
Mr.
property
Chairman.
tax and maintenance.
Mr. Chairman,
Don?
Doug, could you roll this left side up so we can see a little better? Put it up on top instead of on the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
Cherokee University, $200,000 budget, $30,000 expended, or 15%. Requesting another $200,000 continuance out of 07 funding. Marcoma property, $186,000 budget, $20,000 expended, 11%. Requesting a decrease to $39,000 out of 07. Get out the vote, $500,000. No expenditures, that's already been talked about, that's tied up here. Water well drought assistance, $100,000. No expenditures, no request for continuance. And then mod 5. Okay, I want to kind of point out something here that we're getting into an area now where we're like 5 months or less. So I just want to make sure everyone realizes that as we go down this list, the amount of time that these programs have had, each time you go into the next block of budgets that's separated by the horizontal line, each block, as you see out to the right, is the next month's mod. Okay, so each time you go into the next block, that's a month less these programs have had to expend their funding. Self-help community water lines, $1 million budget, $171,000 expended, requesting $866,000 carryover. Now, obviously, that carryover is too high already, and we already know it. So the program will, I'm sure, will do a carryover adjustment on that one because 866 and 171 is, 828 right there is, we know right as of today, only 828 is all that's available for carryover. But I'm sure that this particular program, I expect that carryover number to go down if they can get some issues worked out before 9/30. Risk management, $114,000 budget, no expenditures, requesting $162,000 in next year's budget. Education and culture activity bus, $57,700 with no expenditures, requesting their carryover. Mobile unit project, $55,000 budget with $1,500 expended, 3%, and not requesting a continuance. Cherokee Children's Choir pilot, $31,000 budget, $7,000 expended today, requesting a continuance at the same level for next year. Community garden, $36,000 budget, $14,000 expended today, with no continuation requested. ICW supplemental, $558,000 budget, $25,000 expended today, not requesting any carryover or continuance. That's a mod 8. That's relatively recent. I guess 4 months ago. May, it'd be probably around the May appropriation or May review. Tribal Bridge Program, $225,000 appropriation. If we haven't paid for any of the projects yet. Nothing in the budget for continuance or carryover. Early childhood unit repairs, $188,000 budget, nothing expended today, no request for continuance or carryover. Project budget. Tribal Youth Council, $68,000 budget, $16,000 expended. Requested only $6,500 budget next year. Move this up. low rent subsidy for housing authority, $100,000 budget with no expenditures to date, and no budget for continuance. That's a mod 9. Be a June appropriation. These are all July appropriations in the month of July. Like I said, now we're getting into an area where they haven't had long to obligate and expend. And several of these budgets, I would have liked to have seen this group here, several of these budgets, and you can see, we're not seeing much in the form of carryover requests, which is where the majority of their funds are going to be. It's all new money. Now, we have a philosophical item here to consider. Typical carryover is not budgeted on these gen fund budgets. Okay? You see it on some of them you don't. A general fund project, such as, this is a good example, the database consolidation project, $522,000 just appropriated, what's that, August? They're requesting $445,000 of new monies in 2007, and I'm not sure if the theory here is that this is really unexpended commitment to this project from 2006 funding that typically we just don't call carryover. So you see we may have an inconsistency here because I'm page up. I'm going back up the page right now, and you can see that some of these budgets are sticking their carryover in, and some of them are putting them into the new funding.
Doug, I have a question real quick while you're on carryover.
Go ahead.
So is the $6 million, is that the actual carryover, or where did we come up with the huge amount of carryover, the 14,000 or whatever?
$6 million is carryover that has been put into the budget by the administration.
Yes, it's carryover, and I understand what you're saying, that some of it's not carried over, but you're not calling it carryover, but when we was debating the cost of living, we were talking 14 million can carry over, but I'm only seeing 6 million.
6 is all that the administration has included in their proposal as being identified as carryover funding. What else to expand that?
Sort of confused.
There's an inconsistency here in what do we allow a budget to request their unspent funding the next fiscal year, the next budget process, and which ones are we, I guess, not allowing to put their carryover unspent funding in, and we're treating it as though it was new money for 07. Now, typically, a project that gets started, you can't really stop it. The project related, which, I realize that the majority of these could be huge projects, but some of them are recurring salaries. Kathy, you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment here. This goes back to our budgeting philosophy. When we're preparing the budgets, we're in the March, April time frame. And as Doug has gone through this list, which is a really good exercise, you notice there are several that are project-type budgets. So when we're putting our budgets together in April or even May, a lot of times the program will think that project will be completed before the end of fiscal year, so they do not request a carryover. The items where carryover is requested, we're pretty sure that either the project is not going to be completed or it's kind of a recurring request, such as the contingency reserve and the cash match for grants. This is consistent with the philosophy of being conservative and not bringing forward the actual carryover until after the audit is here. When you're going through this list, some of it's projects, some of it's programs, some of it has salaries, some of it doesn't. And then earlier, when Doug showed the slide that said, okay, you know, we've got 14 million in gen fund for those accounting units that are less than 50% expended. Out of that 14 million, 6 million has already been requested in the 07 budget as carryover. That leaves 8 million, which you can go down through here and you can pick and choose and say, well, I think these guys will spend it and these guys won't. And we can convert to that type of budgeting philosophy, or we can remain consistent with our past practice, and unless we know a specific project is not going to be completed by year end, we don't request a carryover.
And I agree with everything Kelly just said. And that treating of budgets differently, and the timing of when the budgets are submitted, and the expenditures of those budgets throughout the year is the driving force behind this analysis. That is why this analysis, to me, is a very important aspect of this budget process. Because if not, like I said before, we can repeat appropriating dollars for the same purpose year after year, okay? Or, without knowing this, we may find that some of these new dollars are really carryover requests. Well, if they're really carryover requests, then they're going to free up estimated revenues for appropriation in 07. And we don't have to wait until the audit's completed in March or April for those funds to be available for appropriation. But this analysis, I'm not making any conclusions about anything. I think this analysis is a valuable piece of information to understanding where the discretionary funding is going. I'm certainly not going to say that any of them doesn't need your money or needs more. That's not for me to say. But I think the information in this analysis, if you want to get detail, here's some details to this budget that probably would yield several questions as to justifying the request. I'll finish this list up real quick, Mr. Chairman. If you want, like I said, several of these projects are very recent appropriations, so they're going to be, it's going to be easy to understand why they have an expenditure budget as of 9/5. Some of them came into play middle of July. All these up here are middle of July, and those are August. Any questions on this? Yeah, on the back of that page, by the way, again, as I noted earlier, this is sorted by appropriations. You can see at the top of the screen. That's the sort. Now, on the back of your sheet, you'll see the exact same list that's sorted by group, if that's of any value to you. I just wanted to give it to you in a way that, in the area of responsibility, okay? That's all the back page of that is. It's the same data, just presented in a different fashion.
Any questions or comments about that page there? Move on then.
Okay, here's the dividend chart for the budgets. See, we had a significant increase in 07, it's $23 million. The 06 budget these are comprehensive budget requests. These are what go into the Comprehensive Budget Act at the beginning of each year. We have since modified the 06 budget to include some additional funding there. I think we're close to 23 million in 06 budget right now. So if this yellow section of the graph were to include the adjustments to the dividend that we made throughout this year, it would be fairly flat with the 07. And that's where I made that earlier comment that I think that the 23 million is light. I think even if we only based it on the 06 earnings potential of C&E or what they're earning right now in fiscal year 06, that we should expect a couple million more than that this year. Indirect cost pool. This one's always a challenge to explain. I think it's a challenge for me to understand, much less explain it. The little yellow percentages that pop up are the applied IDC rate that we have charged our programs each one of those fiscal years. We are at 17.6. 17.6? Is that right? Yes. 17.64, looks like. Which is our, again, this represents our applied overhead rate. The object here is to support the programs to all of their needs from a resource perspective and allow them the majority of their funding to go to direct cost and not indirect. These are the lowest rates we've seen since '99 or so. The blue part, and I'll try to explain this, is an IDC surplus. It's a budgeted surplus, and it represents where the programs at that rate are budgeting to pay more than what the IDC pool's expenses are budgeting to spend. The red part, or the shortfalls, it's just the opposite. The IDC funded budgets are budgeting more than the programs are budgeting to provide in funding. That's the reason I put them in red. Any questions on this slide? I think we might be able to experience another indirect cost rate decrease with the board. It's awful close. I mean, these are budget numbers, so it's not going to be much if it doesn't move. But
The other thing to remember is that every other year,
yeah.
the 6 rate is based on 04 actual.
Now, Kelly, if you would, when you speak, stand up and talk to the mic, please.
Okay.
So everybody hears.
Yeah, what she said was it takes, in essence, it takes 3 years to see the effect of an overhead reduction. Because of the way that we apply our rate, we look at, next year, we're going to look at how last year did and apply it next year, the year after that. Okay. That's what I think. Okay, so no questions on that. I'll keep moving. In your book, I have a typo. You're heading to this next slide on the back of page 5. Should say 2007, not 2006. The slide's corrected, but your book is in error. Get the slide up here. Okay. You can see there's not much movement there in the funding estimates for 2007 from the motor fuel tax compact. This chart shows you the breakout of the divisions or the groups that's utilizing this money. The standout here on this slide is the HACN Housing Authority going from 1.25 million in 06 to 0 in 07. That program is the emergency housing. So there's not a budget in here for that as a recurring budget on motor fuels tax. Any questions on this slide? We're going to get into the motor fuels tax in a lot more detail here in a minute. So I just wanted to give you some high level, just like health division right there, seeing an $800,000 decrease. We're going to get into that detail of what makes that up in just a minute.
Jacob, Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, this emergency housing that you mentioned, listed under the housing for the Cherokee Nation, is it the same program that's more or less mentioned by the subcommittee? So, since the housing authority is more or less out of the picture, next year they'll be under a different title,
Well,
under a different program, I guess that's what you say. I mean, we're talking about next year, but
that particular program is that accounting unit that has been appropriated $1.25 million this year does not have a budget for next year under any division.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
If it is, it may be called something else because I couldn't find it. Let me look real quick. It was called minor emergency repair in the system. And it was 1.250.
There's nothing showing for 07.
And if that particular accounting unit was changed its ownership, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
what division owns that accounting unit, then that accounting unit would move up to the new division and be under that division. So that particular accounting unit is not funded next year with this proposal. It's being proposed not to be funded. That accounting unit is not.
Well, no.
You're welcome.
Audrey?
Seth,
Audrey?
I'm sorry. You have to throw any questions on page 4, and I do have a question, because I need to
Okay.
understand as we're going forward. So, for instance, on line number 49, the water well drought assistance, there's 100,000 budgeted and nothing spent, and 100,000 left. But there's no new dollars and no carryover dollars. So does that mean that line item is just going to go away? Or-
That means the administration has not requested of this body to refund it.
So that program will be there. So let me ask you this, on the tribal youth council, they budgeted for 68,000, used 16,000, had 62,000 left, but all they're wanting for this next year is 6,500,
That's correct.
but they used 16,000 this past year.
That's
So
correct.
they're asking for way less next year than what they even used this year?
Correct interpretation of the report.
And then, okay. That's what I needed to know, thank you.
You're welcome. Sir?
Gil?
Why would a program like that request land, especially like the Tribal Youth Council, authority to come in?
Kelly, step up and come forward. Apparently you want to answer it.
I believe there is another accounting unit that the Tribal Youth Council gets funding for. We'll need to look into that. I know there was also some special programs this year that we may have funded additional money for in 06 that they haven't requested for 07. So I made a note to get with the program and see what other accounting unit funds that.
If you could bring that back
Sure.
for us, for the body, but for Audrey. Audrey, go ahead.
Would that be the same thing on line 37 in Cherokee Summer Institute? Where we had 35,000 this year, used 17,000, have 18,000 left, but they're requesting nothing for next year? Does that mean that program won't be next year? Or is it going to be coming out of another pot of money?
It's possible. When we get into each program, some of those questions might be answered as well. And on the water drought, water well drought, that's a late appropriation or sort of late. They may think they can spend that before the end of September. Again, have to ask the program. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
These are all good questions, and they're all valid questions. And that's the reason why I wanted to put something before you like this that could distinguish between where do we have what appears to be an underutilization of spending authority, there's obviously explanations to all this. I don't know them, but I wanted to make sure you knew what those were. This is not an attempt to make anyone look bad or for me to be a mean guy. This is an attempt to inform the body of what the appropriations from this body has been utilized up to this point. We're so close to the end of the year that some of them are going to spawn some very good questions. And I think it's going to help us all move forward with a much better budgeting process for the Cherokee Nation.
Chuck?
Doug, and along those lines, I think we need to keep in mind that this is a proposed budget. That's what it is, a proposed budget. And we need this information to ask the questions that's been asked and other questions in the future. But we have to have this information, and I appreciate the fact that you're able to glean all this from this information. For us to ask the questions, we need to ask to accept all the proposed budget, portion of the proposed budget, or to change it, the way we feel like will serve the Cherokee people. But we have to have this information first. I appreciate it.
Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Yeah, I'll move on. If there's not any other questions on the motor fuels. Like I said, this is one of our discretionary funding sources that I've historically, over several years, given you the breakout of a motor fuel compact as far as the divisions that's utilizing it. In the past, this particular funding source was usually the funding source that we had a balance. We didn't fund any appropriated motor fuels for recurring programs. It was all project related. And typically that balance was appropriated out through the course of the year. So it was important to see where is it in the budget. Here of recent few years or so, this particular funding source has been brought up in the Comprehensive Budget Act list, fully appropriated, along with the other discretionary funding sources. Maybe in the future, I don't know, it's up to this body if this chart should continue for future presentations. But that was the reason why it was created, was because of its nature, the way it was handled in the past, and now it's not handled any differently than Gen Fund. I went ahead and included it this year, and I thought, I'll let y'all tell me not to include it before I start taking things out.
Mr. Johnson?
On this motor fuel tax under account, the change from 2006 to 2007, does that reflect the new funding for the Navy Clinic and the motor fuel tax bill fund, the Marshall Clinic? Is that the way you look at it, Chuck?
I'm not sure if that's reflected there or not. Is it done?
Yes, this fund continues to fund, as you said, the Navy Clinic, but it's not funding the Bartlesville Clinic anymore. Isn't that what you just said?
No, I thought it was the other way around. I thought the Navy Clinic went in for this new funding program.
That hasn't gone through yet from my...
I agree.
Chuck, please.
Yeah. To my understanding, it has not gone through. There are revenue sources from the Barnesville Clinic that we did not have prior to this, and that may be reflected in this, but I think Melody has an answer here.
I think what you said is accurate, that Bartlesville Clinic was funded with new revenues from IHS.
Right.
And so those are funded in the federal fund, and then the Navy Clinic is in the middle.
But that, to my knowledge, is still being reviewed. That meeting, you're referring to that meeting we had in Omaha some time ago.
Right.
Yeah, that's still being sought after, I believe, and is looked into.
Jack Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, where does the $1 million that we use to provide road funds for the county commissioner, where does that fit in this charge?
Well, it's in the community services, the $2 million. It's in there.
$2 million.
$2,059,000. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
we don't have a big...
But it's in there.
We
Yeah. Your district
$2
road
million.
program is in
Yeah.
there.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. It's a good question, Mr. Martin, because that, what appears as a $300,000 funding increase represents carryover estimate of that road program out of 06 into 07. They've estimated what the projects that you've identified during the course of this year that aren't going to be expended until after September 30. And they've estimated that in here, and that's why you see the spike of 300, or the increase of 300,000 on the community service division. Good question. Did that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the motor fuel tax? Okay, here's the Cherokee Nation total salaries. In '02, $61 million budget, 79% expended, for $48 million. In '03, $64 million budget, $10 million remained unspent. In '04, $70 million salary budget, $13 million remained unspent. In '05, $68 million salary budget, $8 million remained unspent. In 2006, it's a $73 million budget this current year. Obviously, we're still in it, so I can't tell you how much we spent. And we've got a 3% increase, nominal increase of $3 million. That still represents 28% over the '05 actuals.
Taylor.
Doug, I'm just looking at this, trying to understand. I don't know if our treasurer's still here, but in terms of utilizing the salary amounts that we have budgeted, from the actuals we had, the average of those 4 years from 2002 to 2005 was 17%. And the utilization got a little bit better, meaning we spent more of what we had budgeted. But even then, 2005, it was 12%. So if we were to forecast going forward in the future, I mean, we're leaving anywhere between $9 and $12 million that we're not utilizing. I guess my question is just trying to undo that puzzle and figure out why we historically budget for dollars that we're not going to spend. Can you infer from the reports of why we never get better than 90% utilization?
Well, part of it's going to be related to your turnover, whatever turnover ratio you have as a government. In my mind, it would be attributable to that. Because all turnover usually has some downtime in that position where no one's filling it, we're not paying salaries. Some of it's going to be budgeting positions that doesn't get filled. As far as trying to really put your finger on something that's really causing it, I think it is ultimately it's a reflection on budget accuracy. There's multiple variances or multiple explanations to these type of variances that can come into play on a program by program basis. Yeah, part of it's going to be normal attrition, vacancies and the turnovers. Part of it's going to be positions that doesn't get filled. Some of it's going to be positions that we put in for an entire year and we fill them at halfway mark. Or we'll budget at X dollars for a salary, but we're able to hire in under that, and we don't go back and realign our budget, or correct it. So there, I'm sorry, I can't give a real definitive. It's because of this, but I think I've pretty well hit the majority of the other significant factors.
Kelly, and then we'll be Meredith and then here.
And I agree with what Doug said. There's all kinds of reasons for variances between budget and actual. For example, right now I have a report from HR that we have 200 openings that we're trying to recruit for. Some of those, 58 of those are in health, which are harder to recruit for. But if we don't include them in our budget, then we don't have the authority to go out and recruit for them if we happen to find someone qualified. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. You need the budget authority to be able to go out and do it, and you do encounter problems. And then you have turnover, and you have being able to hire people maybe at a lower salary than what you budgeted for. So there are lots of reasons. One question I was going to ask Doug is total salaries. Did you account for the way we do annual leave different for actual versus how we budget? We budget 2,080 hours. And we use a lower fringe rate when we put our budgets together, because when you look at the actuals of time off work is charged to the fringe pool, and that's included in the fringe rate that we charge the programs. So annual leave, sick leave, holiday, none of that is in salaries when you're looking at actual. The contra, there is a debit to the accounting unit for the annual leave taken, and then a credit to credit that accounting unit to charge the fringe pool. So that always distorts our analysis when we try to compare budgets to actuals. Because when you're putting together a budget, there's not a really good way to plan how much time people are going to take off. So we just budget the full 2,080 hours and reduce the fringe rate that we use for budgetary purposes to try to compensate for that.
Tell me that it would be accurate statement, though, looking historically, that we've never gone over 90% utilization of these dollars, that it would include those.
The best way to compare salaries, budget versus actual, is to do salaries and fringe all together. And I don't know the answer to that because I haven't run that analysis recently.
But there might be some possibilities that, looking at the historical figures, that at least in terms of accuracy of forecasting, you might be able to come a little bit closer. And
I mean, we definitely could take money out. And in fact, when times are tight, in my department, financial resources, we have, when we prepare budgets, we've told indirect cost groups, we want to see a flatline budget. That's how we've tried to control costs in our indirect cost pool. And I have a lot of long-term employees, so, if you give them a little bit of an increase, it's almost impossible to do a flat line. So when I do my budget, I kind of estimate what my turnover is going to be, and I actually put a negative number in there to stay within the guidelines. Some groups are better at forecasting that than others.
if there had to be a number, if we were, say, in a position where we wanted to bring this number down, we never used over 90%.
I don't know that. I'd have to go back and run the reports, adding salaries and fringe benefits together.
Right now, 10%, which we're going to go down above that, is $7.6 million. That'd be quite a bit that could go somewhere else.
That's true. And then what we would have to do is eliminate a lot of open positions and no longer try to recruit for some of these doctors and nurses and accountants.
And even half of that, 5%, $3 million.
Sure.
One thing that I want to interject is that we're in the process of putting together a comprehensive fringe benefit analysis for the tribal council. And I think what we're going to find coming out of that analysis is whenever we look at just total salaries and fringe costs, the way that they're intertwined with the leave taken, sick or vacation, that we may need to, I might need to change this chart to have salary for a total compensation chart, including fringe benefits. If more likely, some years it's not going to affect, some years it will, because we're self-insured on our fringe benefit, our insurance costs. I know 2005 is a high spike year in actual insurance claims. I'm not exactly sure why, but 2005 was just like out, off the roof. And that's going to affect that particular year's slide. Other years it won't, when we came in under. So the volatility of the self-insured indemnification plan for the employee's health insurance is going to have an impact on this chart. And I think it could affect the perception of this.
Well, if I was even looking at historical averages, the actuals we had, 17%, and that's $13 million. If you would use that trend, I'm not guessing anything.
But I'm not sure that number is accurate because of the difference between how we report actual and how we prepare our budgets. That's why I asked Doug the question, is this total salaries and fringe benefit?
No.
Okay, then it's not accurate.
Well,
I
wait a
think
minute.
it's accurate. Hey, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say Doug's doing it wrong. It's because of this nuance that we have in how we account for leave time when we record actual results, and when you're preparing a budget, it's almost impossible to predict how much time people are going to take off.
Yeah, at least for the salaries, right?
Yes, only
It's
salary.
only salary. And even then, you know, there's money unexpended in excess of 10% every year.
This is one variable of the total budget variance. This is one variable. Now, this particular variable, these are absolutely correct numbers, but this isn't the entire compensation picture because of this nuances with the fringe pool. That's why in your book on page 7, I put that in there because there's 7 major expense categories. Salaries and wages, which is this chart. Benefits, contract services, travel, capital expenditures, operational, and IDC. And it may be that we need to chart all of them to get a clear picture of everything, but
Can you do that for tomorrow?
yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Meredith.
You answered a lot of that.
Doug. Meredith. As a
Maybe
whole.
From a legal standpoint, so I think you answered a lot of that. Salaries is defined for budgetary purposes as what?
It's everything, 2,080 hours per
So it's just,
full-time employee. It's
okay.
just salaries.
So how do we define total compensation?
Total compensation would be salaries and fringe benefits.
And fringe means the benefits of the healthcare,
It means-
health insurance and all of that.
Healthcare, annual leave, sick leave,
Everything.
taxes, everything.
I'm clear.
Okay. Karen.
Thank you. My concern is, we live in a reality where, unlike the federal government, we can't operate under a deficit, right? So, I wish this was some kind of ideal world, but I don't see us being able to get some kind of like 98% or something like that, or even probably 95. So I see the trend is, for the most part, improvement on how accurate we are on the budget. So, I'm curious, what is our goal here? Like, what's the typical government, that can't operate under a deficit? What is our, because we've made the comment, I guess, or someone's made the comment that we've done a poor job. Well, what is a good job? If we're going to say that, what is a good job?
One thing I would like to address, looking at Doug's report here, comparing total salaries to budget, 60 million versus 68 million. Fringe benefits, that same period, actual were 30 million and budget was 24 million. So that would mean that we were 6 million over on our fringe benefits. So that variance would be 2 million, not 8 million.
Okay, so we
If you-
really need to work on this graph and on the
But we need to work on what we're calling budgeted salaries.
Right.
Exactly.
Not work the charts right.
Yeah.
But we need to work on what we're calling.
The chart ties to the reports. It's because of how we account for leave taken.
The other thing I'd like to see somehow included is if we're going to report something like this with respect to positions, then I need to understand how many of that percentage, what is that? Like with health, if there's a way to break that out. I mean, because we've talked about it before in these other committee meetings. We're sitting there with open budget items, we can't fill these positions for whatever reason. Some of them is because we needed to increase the salary for those positions. We need to solve the need field, especially in health, for example. So, I mean, if we're going to analyze this better, I think we have to have more information in the picture.
This is my opinion. The best way to look at salaries is to look at the whole picture, salaries plus fringe. Then you don't have to worry about the distortion between actual being accounted for one way on the leave and being budgeted a different way for budget. And as I said, in 2005, if you add the benefits, Taylor, in answer to your earlier question, if you look at total compensation for 2005, our overall budget variance is 2 million total. Which is about, what, 5%?
But keep in mind, 2005's actual fringe cost is by far the historical maximum we've ever had. I mean, it's shot out the roof. We budgeted 24 million, we spent 30 on fringe. I mean, and that's not because of time off. That's because of health claims. So if we do anything, maybe we need to separate health claims from the paid time off to get a better picture of what's our true compensation. Because let's not confuse compensation with health insurance. Okay? Because that's what we're doing when we throw fringe on top of salaries. We're lumping it all together, including Social Security tax, 401k contribution, everything. So if we're going to do anything, I recommend we take salaries and say, what are we going to pay for 2,080 hours, whether you're here on the job or you're out sick? Here's what it is. It's budgeting practice.
That is our budget practice. We don't account for it that way on an actual basis because a lot of our federal programs, you can only charge salaries for hours worked. That's why this fringe pool concept was set up, so that an employee earns so many hours per pay period, and then when they take that time off, it goes back to the fringe pool.
Something to consider.
Yep.
Maybe we ought to not change the way we actually booking things. I think we all have a comfort factor that we're doing it correctly. I have no doubt they're booking it correctly. Maybe we need to change our budgeting practice to more align with our actual booking practice.
And that would require estimating how many hours each employee is going to take off per year.
And we do that in the form of a budget fringe rate to extend. Is that a component of our budget fringe rate reduction?
Yes.
Okay.
The best way is to look at the total picture. Total compensation.
All minds clear? Continue.
The next slide is Cherokee Nation staffing levels. This is just total. Comprehensive budget, you can see a slight increase, 125 over the 06 comprehensive budget level. Now these are the numbers that were based on the comprehensive budget, because I have no way of knowing how many employees at month 11 of the year we have in comparison to where all the budgeted positions at the beginning of that year. Now here's your salary by function. 3 major functions: governments and boards, the service divisions, and the resource divisions. And you can see that 2005, these are all budget, by the way. 5.5 million in 2005 for governments to 6.2 to 7.2. I don't want anyone getting alarmed that the government is increasing salaries by $1 million here, because the lion's share of that is bringing the housing rehab group into the Office of the Chief Division. Okay, that's the lion's share of that increase. When in reality, I didn't break it apart because I showed this chart based on departments and divisions, and Office of the Chief, along with Tribal Council, along with the Judicial Appeals Tribunal, and all of our boards and commissions are grouped in governments and boards. And we're going to have a sheet at the end of the overview in your book that breaks out what groups or what divisions are part of these three groups here as far as government, board, service, and resource. Slight decrease in the resource divisions. That's good. That green bar down at the bottom that you can see has remained flat or has actually decreased a little bit over time is what we're seeing. That makes sense in relation to the IDC chart earlier. Okay, last couple of years we've seen the IDC rate decrease because our spending is decreasing. And to $1.8 million increase on the service divisions, which is the lion's share of the increase. Here's your numbers. There's your head counts by the same breakout. 67, increase of 67 positions in the governments and boards.
I believe 58 of those are that housing department that has been assigned up under the office of the chief. And it's an interesting number here. The 06 budget for the resource or the overhead support divisions, if you want to call them that, had 341 full-time equivalents in last year's comprehensive budget, and it has 356 in this year's comprehensive budget, an increase of 15 positions, or 5%, yet the total salaries on the chart earlier, I'll get there, actually remain flat. They show that the IDC cost centers are experiencing a pattern of more accurate budgeting. And they may also be taking some vacant positions out of their budget and filling them. Those two things can affect that. Okay. Okay. Now, in your book, you've got a page 7, which is attachment A that I referred to in the introductory letter. Page 7 shows the 2007 budget. In the first column, 2006 budget, the variance. The next group is a set of 05 budget compared to 05 actual. The reason that year is comparing a budget to actual, that's our last year we've actually completed in the audit. And you can see that in 2005 there was an expenditure budget of $279 and we spent $229. $50 million in 05 that was in the budget went unspent. And you can see the groups that went unspent, $16.7 million, the largest, contract services, $16 million in capital outlay and $14 million in operational. You can see why this budget is, or why this sheet is useful, because there's a lot of information on this one page. And by the way, this is Cherokee Nation government combined. Does not include C&E or C&I or the housing authority, but it does include the housing authority funds that are coming through the tribe. So as far as the primary government, this one sheet wraps it all up, and down at the bottom represents all the funding sources. Any questions on that? On that sheet? Page 8. Is a scenario of all. This sheet is all your funding sources, and at the top, the bulk funding sources, as I noted below, these are the discretionary funding sources that will be going. That I've got the reports to go into detail on all of these funding sources. The rest of them are determined by the funding agency. So I have included all the detailed reports for the bottom half of those sources. You can see that what sticks out is the $30 million decrease in 07 budget compared to this current year budget. $15 million of that's that capital projects fund that all the projects were in and then were transferred out to C&I this year. HUD's got an $8 million decrease, but again, we don't have any of the 07 IHP in this budget proposal either. Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Check it out.
Thank you. Doug, what's one of the difference in your motor fuel tax, 07 and 06, approximately 2 years?
That's carryover. That's a reduction of estimated carryover.
Okay.
We put all the carryover that we estimate we'll have into this budget, and we did it last year. This year we estimated $2 million less, which tells me that several of these large projects, the roads, some of the big health initiatives that came out of motor fuels last year, that's a contributing factor. Under your tab, 2 tabs behind there, which we'll get into here in just a little bit, I've got a breakout of motor fuels by accounting unit, and several of this is the good thing about this type of a table, is the reports behind it for that top part, the bolded discretionary funding sources. My report allows any of those top, you can drill down through those numbers as you go back in tabs. The next tab is going to show Gen Fund, tribally funded. If you just flip over that first tab, you'll see that's the breakout of the tribal funded 46.7 million by division. The next tab breaks each division down by department. And then the tab after that takes each department under each division and breaks it out by actual budget. So for discretionary funding, you have in your book the ability to drill down from any of these rolled up summary reports all the way down to the individual budget, at the individual budget level.
One thing I wanted to point out on motor fuels tax, I believe it was in 2005, we got a special one-time check there. The state had been holding some of our funds in escrow. It was a little over $1 million, so that's part of what's looking like a reduction in funding for motor fuels tax for 07. Yeah. Yeah, it was 06. It was probably received in 05 but carried over to 06. But that does affect the motor fuels tax sources a little bit.
The largest variable to that $2 million, Jacobo, is the 1.25 of minor emergency repair. That's not in 07. From a use of funds. Page 9, we're almost finished with the review. This is a report, just strictly budget by funding source, and it tells you, page 9 is where you'll see the impact of the transfers. The direct expense is $315 million. Now keep in mind that includes all $32 million of road funding. The indirect expense column shows $758,000, but we budget indirect costs to break even because that's the best we can do at the time. And you'll see that under the indirect cost funding line item, you'll see $19.7 million of direct expense with a $19.6 million credit. The pool budget's to break even, but all the other funding sources have indirect costs associated on them. That's what they're going to pay in indirect costs. So they're going to fund that $19.6 million with all the other. So if you're left with a positive number at the bottom, that means they're going to pay in more than what the IDC pool's budgeting to spend. It's good to see that in a positive number. We see that in a negative number, and we can expect a rate increase if everyone spends their budget. Year after next. And finally, page 10 is the salaries and full-time employees for 2007 compared to 2006 by division. I'm sorry I don't have an overhead for that, but the $1.2 million on the Office of the Chief increase in salaries, like I said, that's predominantly related to that new housing department that we can get into under the Chief's office. Health Services has a $1.3 million increase. That's only a 5%. Commerce is a 25% increase in Commerce division. And again, all of these numbers, as you notice the wages and the full-time equivalents moving by division on page 10, you can go to any one of these divisions tab and I break it down by the departments within that division, the programs in there, and what's driving these numbers. Which program's driving them up or down. Some of them are transfers, some of them are being consolidated into a new department, and maybe even moving divisions. So some of these pluses are because there's negatives elsewhere. Any questions on that?
Page 10, anyone? Question, answer, verification?
And that completes the overview section. The next tab in your book is where we're getting into these discretionary funding sources. The same funding sources for the next 3 tabs are presented. It's only the discretionaries, but there are 3 different levels of detail, from a consolidated approach under that tab before page 11 that shows basically each division's utilization of Gen Fund, for instance, on page 11. And what sticks out here is there's $10 million decrease on financial resources. I believe that's largely due to carryover. But also, if you go back 2 tabs, on page 38, 5.5 million of it is in Gen Fund Ops. At the bottom of page 38. And $5 million is due to the Rama settlement funds not being in the 07 for the clinic constructions. That carryover is not. In 06 it came in, and then it was transferred out again to the capital projects, and now we don't use the Rama funds as being a transferred item anymore. It's on the capital project fund. So hopefully you can see how the report works. Motor fuels tax, page 12, it's visible there with the housing authority of the minor emergency repair, the $1,250,000 decrease on division number 18. You see the effect of that, Mr. Martin?
Where are you now, Steve?
Page 12, the $1,250,000 decrease of the 2 is that minor emergency repair. $800,000 decrease is in health services. Motor fuel tax appropriated for health services in 2006 was $1.9 million. It was both those clinics, Bartlesville and Benita. One of them's not in there this month, so that's why the $800,000 decrease in health services on page 12.
Thank you, Delaware, for that.
Page 13, something maybe worth noting here. I want you to look at the indirect cost pool. Very flat budget for overhead. Very flat. $100,000 decrease, Office of the Chief. $871,000 increase in financial resources. That's your increase in financial resources, your contingency increase.
No, that's not. The reason that appears.
Increased IUC.
The reason that appears to be an increase is that
Decrease in recovery.
the decrease in recovery.
Decrease. You want to explain that?
No.
So I will.
Just say it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It shows as being an increase, but it's actually a decrease in recovery. Motor vehicle tax, Page 14. Got a $2.7 million increase. 1.3 of that is in the commissions and boards. Tag office for the apportionment reserves for the roads. Without getting too much into accounting, we reserve in our tag office budget our estimated apportionments for that year in a reserve by appropriation line item. Once that is quantified for the previous year, then that reserve gets released and gets proportioned out to the schools and the roads and law enforcement. We can find ourselves with what appears to be a significant budget increase from one year to the next, when in reality we're reducing our reserve, which is in our 06, we reduce our reserve when apportionments get made. 07, they're still up at the full level. That's the way I can explain it. Roads Department on the motor vehicle tax is the same thing. They're budgeting the $1.3 million increase, which is related to the same transfer out of the vehicle tax for those reserves for the apportionment. This is a good example of why we get into this double use of funds, or this over expenditure for including transfers. If I budget $2 million to be transferred out of motor vehicle tag office, and I budget to transfer in on the roads department, and then I budget to spend that money on the roads, that money is in the budget twice. Once to transfer out, once as a capital expenditure for road construction. When in reality, we're just spending it once. So that's why I wanted to point out that the transfer outs are not actual expenditure items. They're just shifting of funding. The next tab, starting on page 22, are these same discretionary funding sources by department. So, again, you'll see the tribally funded or gen fund where Office of the Chief shows to be increasing $771,000. You can see that it's in the department of Principal Chief. And again, if you go to the next page, you go to the next tab at the top of that first page 34, you'll see there's the $600,000 increase, and it's from bringing in the charitable contribution budget and the Secretary of State budget. You see how those reports work, the drill down, how it enables you to drill down through these numbers to get ultimately to the budget level. And the only level lower than that is line items, and that's your blue book.
What would the committee think about taking about a 5 or 10 minute break and standing up? Okay. We'll just make it so, and we'll come back at, let's say 3:30. Not that anybody's tired or their caboose is wore out.